Kia ora and welcome to the Courage Club. The Courage Club is for us, parents or caregivers of deaf, disabled, medically fragile or neurodivergent children. If you're just joining the conversation, I encourage you to start listening from episode 1. We've created the Courage Club so we have a safe space to have some brave chats about our kids, disability and sexual safety. We know our children are particularly at risk. We also know that as parents of disabled and neurodivergent children, it's easy to feel isolated, exhausted and anxious. So we want to help by beginning the conversation. Today in our 4th episode, we're talking about building foundations for the future and for our children's positive sexual identity. It can feel really weird talking about this stuff when our kids are still kids, but everything we've been talking about up to this point is really all connected to this. It's a protective factor in keeping them safe and happy. So, we spend some time chatting about making space for our child as a human being, helping them to build a strong sense of their own identity and teaching them what they'll need to know for the future. And of course, sometimes that means being really straight up and direct. We also talk about our hopes for our kids, and I loved hearing Kiki, Angela and Lena's hopes for the future. We hope you find some support in this conversation. Welcome to the Courage Club. So, how do we build the foundations for our tamariki's positive sexual identity? Really easy question. I'm sure you all have a very easy way of answering that.
Is this in 6 words or less?
Yeah, 6 words or less. I mean, it's really hard, isn't it? Talking about, it feels strange to think about your child's sexual desires, their sexuality, but it also feels like this is so important, right? Like it's so important to be thinking about this and thinking about maybe sort of the stereotypes around people with disabilities being desexualized and that type of thing. So I'm really excited about this conversation, but I'm kind of nervous about it as well. Like, how do we talk about this? So we're going to try and talk about it, and it might feel a bit weird. Do you feel a bit odd thinking about this stuff? I feel like some of it's easier for me to think about than other bits, like identity and gender feels a bit easier for me than sexual desire. What's it like for you just sort of approaching this topic?
I'm a huge prude, like naturally, and so I find it really, like, if someone was to talk to me about this, I would be like, no. But weirdly, when I come to talk to my kids about it, I think because I'm so factual about it, my kids are way more like open about this than I am, and they've really helped with just their curiosity and their inquisitiveness, have helped me really think through, okay, how do we have these conversations in a way that gives you the tools to keep yourself safe, to explore your, identity and your sexuality safely, and in like a positive celebratory way. But yeah, it's hard as a prude to do that. But yeah, there's really basic things that, just basic pieces of information, and there's like great resources out there like family planning. There's other amazing resources out there, so I'm not like inventing any of this stuff, and I have really relied on resources actually because I didn't have any of the framework for this. But there's just really basic things like we've talked about what is public and what is private. So there are things that we do in our bodies and with our bodies that are private things, and like for my kids at the ages that they are now, it's like those are private things that you do alone, and there are places in the house that you can go and do that, and that is how we manage it at this stage of your lives. And as you'll know what happens when they get older and into the teenage years, and I'm sure I'm going to have to update my vocabulary around this and how I explain this sort of stuff, but yeah, you wash your hands, you have clean hands when you if you're, doing any intimate care or intimate stuff with your body. And so there's just really basic tools that I can give them at this stage that then I will learn and they will learn and we can build on together. But yeah, hard as a prude.
Really hard as a prude. I feel you so hard on this because I'm exactly the same. I'm like, oh, somebody else is doing it. This is awesome. The school is amazing at doing and having these conversations, and it's actually called Navigating the Journey, and it's all the family planning resources, and it's fantastic. And it was so eureka moment when I went to the parent evening where they presented what they're going to present to the children over a course of 2 years. And part of me was like, oh my God, I don't have to talk about it. Were
you gutted when you realised you do have to?
Yeah, exactly. Where you get questions like, what is masturbation? And you're like,
Ask your father.
I think as well there's new challenges with when your child is autistic and there's no I remember being asked about what is masturbation, and he was just firing at me like an interrogation, and it was terrifying. Do you do it? How often do you do it? When do you do it? And I'm just oh God. Angela, you're actually tested because you're ahead of us. So give us all of your wisdom.
please
Tell us
how do we deal with this?
I think the public and the private thing is huge. Like I said to you, once you have a teenage boy, you probably don't want to encourage them, if you've only got one bathroom, to masturbate in the bathroom, because they'll be in there all the time. And so prefer to teach them to do it in their bedroom, because otherwise you'll never get them to use the toilet. I think it's about just giving them the information, even buying your kids some lube, giving them tissues and all that sort of stuff, so they, just normalising it, I suppose. We shut the curtains, we lock the door, this is private time, shh. And it's being that really direct, which is kind of hard when that's certainly not something that you expect to teach your teenage son. It's just themselves.
The difference between if you have a neurotypical child and a neurodivergent child, I have one of each, and just the different way that I have to talk about it. It's a really different approaches. But I just want to say, my heart felt really happy hearing you say that. You talked so without any shame, and I just feel sometimes it kind of feels like when you're parenting, you're reparenting yourself. And I think as much as sometimes I go, oh, this is so hard talking to my child about, talking to my 8-year-old about being grilled on my masturbation habits. But there's also this part of me that's hey, I get to do this in a way that I wish it had been done for me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I get to help them.
Yeah.
And
It's big feelings, eh?
Yeah. I think the way that I've overcome my is by just being guided by my children's natural curiosity, but also conceptualizing this as just another body process. So we have talked about body processes. We know how to do that in our household. And so adding this is just another element of how we talk about body processes. And it's very normal, and there's different tools that you might need, and you might need different kinds of support and assistance around this. But it's actually just a really normal a ubiquitous normal human experience. And so, we all have bodies, they're all okay. And so talking about it in that context has been really helpful, destigmatizing it in my own brain, because I feel like I was the biggest barrier. I'm in this regard, I am probably one of the biggest barriers to my children being set up well, and I've really had to work on that myself.
Yeah. And it's also about educating your village, how open you might be too, which is always interesting with some wider whānau members. But, we know still that our little neurodiverse sensory seekers get put in overalls with the zip up the back at school to stop them doing that nonsense at school, But, that's so much easier than enabling them to find other sensory activities that might be more appropriate for school, and save that stuff for home, It's, I don't know, I think it's a conversation that all the people who support us need to be a lot more open about. Yeah, we can't always rely on the schools, and particularly for our children who, might process things differently. They might need things repeated a lot more, or different types of resources used. So it's just such an ongoing 15-minute, it's a revolving 15-minute conversation.
And Angela, I love what you said about, it's not just the conversations we have with our tamariki, it's the conversations everybody else has with them as well. I think there's this idea of sort of a one-way channel of we will teach you about sex and that's it, or any aspect, of consent or sexuality, anything like that. And I think for me a real learning opportunity was when my son's a hugger as well, very into that, and I kept thinking, why are we struggling so much with someone at the school or saying that he keeps hugging me when I don't want to be hugged? And I kept thinking, we've been over this and I've seen him ask consent, so where's the breakdown, what's happening? And I realised it was because he had said, can I hug you? And that person had said, you can hug me anytime. And to a neurodivergent person, words mean what they mean, that's, you said anytime, so he felt like he didn't have to keep asking because that person had said anytime. And it was a lesson to me that it's not just about him learning. Neurotypical people without disabilities, they need to learn too. They need to learn to respect boundaries, to respect consent, to think about what they say. This is not a one-way dialogue. I'm learning from my child, and that beautiful thing you said, Kiki, about their curiosity and how wonderful that is. But also everybody around them needs to learn too. If my approach is my child is leading me, I'm learning from my child. Everybody should be learning from the tamariki around them. If we're not sure, seeking out those resources. And I think seeking a wide range of information has been really helpful to me because I've done things like go to the cyber safety evenings and things, and they're so geared towards neurotypical children. I went to one where the guy was like, any parent who lets their child have a phone in their room overnight, and I'm like, well, my child's phone is their medical device. That's where we monitor, that's where his alarms are, or saying, your child should only have X amount of screen time. A lot of people with neurodivergent children, their screen is an extension of themselves. It is a regulation device and entertainment, but it's also, it helps them navigate the world, their screen. So sometimes I go away from these things feeling like even more isolated, how am I meant to navigate this when the things being told are really set for one type of child,
I think that speaks to the wider sort of issue, which is that disabled kids are often seen as that is what they are. They are just a disabled kid, and they're not viewed as a full complex human being, and with a multitude of other identity factors and experiences. And so I think really sort of protecting that and creating space for that and advocating that they are a really multifaceted person during their care and in their in the community that we build for them, and that sort of stuff is really important.
I totally agree with you. And I think that for me, that's part of the why this is important and why I really want to, build this foundation of them having a really healthy, positive sexual identity, because I often think that, as we know with society, they can treat disabled people as desexualizing them and thinking this is not something a disabled child needs to know, you know. So for me, I'm thinking about my child may not have access to the same things that teenagers might have, resources, understanding, conversations, you know. So that's why it's important to me to have those conversations about sexuality, desire, that type of thing, because even if I'm not sure how to do it, if it makes me a bit, I don't know, if it makes me go, ugh, I know it's important, you know.
And it's about having that, we want them to have a really positive sexual experience later on. It's really hard to have those conversations now or soon, considering ages. And it's trying to negate any, like you touched on before, like those little harms, that potential little harms. If we can try and negate any harm, it's not realistic, but let's try. And if we can make it as positive an experience as possible. And
I just love what you were saying before, Angela, about your son's just like confidence in his own identity and how that was a really protective factor for him. And I think part of this is like the more we can help our kids have a strong sense of themselves and a strong sense of their identity, the less they're going to be susceptible to, you know, coercive situations. And I think to do that, we need to be really open-minded, because, you know, when you have a kid who's disabled, then, you know, you learn very, very quickly that you have to throw your assumptions out the window.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to bring that into how we have these discussions, because our kids will be whoever they are.
Yeah.
And what we can do as parents is to help them be really strong and clear and happy in their identity, or however they identify, so that they have, when, you know, if they're in a situation where they're approached by someone and it, you know, doesn't align or doesn't feel right, they can, you know,
communicate that.
And
it also, the last thing we want to do is set our children up as potential predators either, you know. Like, you know, if my adult son thought it was okay to go around hugging random women in the street because he thought they're gorgeous, you know, that's not fair on that woman, you know. And I think so it's protecting our kids, but it's also teaching them what is safe for other people as well, you know.
I think that it's when we often think about when our children have a lot of support needs or medical needs or anything, that your village becomes really big. But that in a way has made me think about I'm not just looking after my child, I'm looking after all children. And when it comes to sexual safety, that is something I think about with not just, you know, my children, but how can I make sure that they're safe around other children and that type of thing. I think that's really beautifully and bravely said and talked about. So thank you for that, Angela. I think, you know, in discussing this, I've been like, it feels easier when you talk about it, right? Like once you start having the conversation with other parents, you know, there's things that you've said here that I'm really going, oh, I can think about that and take that home. So how do we be sort of brave about these conversations, I guess, and take them further and learn more?
I made a list when Miles was quite a lot younger, that of the things that I thought he would need to know, you know, starting off with the naming your body parts, learning about emotions, learning about public, private, and then, you know, just going right through the whole gamut of, you know, masturbation, sex, relationships, blah, blah. It seemed to be a really long list. I must look at it. And just started looking at, trying to make it not even age appropriate, but, you know, developmentally appropriate, and started finding resources or things or whatever that I felt that, you know, that I could give some teaching to him around these things that he could understand. And it is quite weird when you kind of break it down, you know, like what do you need to know to become a fully functional adult? Step one, you know. Yeah. But I guess, you know, the thing is that these are just the nuances and the things that other children just learn by osmosis pretty much. Again, with hopefully some brave conversations with the people who support them. But, you do have to be quite direct about it. What does my kid need to know? Because they deserve to have a beautiful sexuality, be a beautiful who they are and what they need to be. And plus, what do they need to learn to get there, So that was how I started. But I don't know,
It's nearly like one of those life skill
Yeah.
steps, and it's where that includes that brave conversation. But I still don't know how to break it down. As you say, it's nearly like you have to make that list, and it seems so abstract.
Yeah,
But
well, it absolutely does. Because
maybe that is the right way of doing it, because it is just eating a whole elephant 1 teaspoon at a time.
Yeah.
What on
earth?
That's the only way. You can't have that big brave conversation.
No.
All at once,
No.
because it doesn't make sense.
No.
Because it's about everything.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by eat the elephant 1 teaspoon at a time, because it is just taking tiny little bites.
Yeah.
And that's where that segmenting everything into kind of blocks or little tiny strategies.
There's a big difference between teaching your 4-year-old that it's not okay to masturbate on the couch next to grandma, because she might object to that, and just redirecting them, then teaching your, prepubescent child about these are the perhaps the mechanics that you may not have worked out yourself, and this is where it's appropriate for you to do it. So, but it is kind of building on that skill.
It's too important not to talk about it.
Absolutely.
And maybe the little conversations allow for the little bits of courage we have them, to have this sort of, this lifelong learning conversation, because I feel like, at nearing 40, I'm still learning things about sex, sexuality, gender, my body. So having this idea of, yes, be curious, and I think when I think about my hopes for my kids around their sexual identity and that type of thing, I just hope that they are curious and playful and approach kind of sex, sexuality, gender, all those things in kind of a way of learning. That's what I hope. I want them to be safe. And I think about sexual safety. I think about the risks and all that all the time. On the flip side, I also want them to have fun with their sexuality. I want them to explore their, sexuality and sex and play and have this joyful, delightful experience. I don't want to think just because I have a disabled child that I've only got this, I hope they don't get sexually assaulted. I want, all of the bright, beautiful things that we all have in discovering ourselves and our gender, sexuality, our sex lives. I want all of that for my kids as well. So what do you want for your kids, for their sexual identity? Or I know that's a really big question, but
I just want them to feel accepted, and I want them to feel celebrated, and I want them to feel like they can be their authentic selves in any context. And given the world, that seems like, that's a big thing to try and achieve. But, we're setting that up now in the expectations that we have around, who is in our village, how do we talk about bodies, how do we talk about disability, and it just flows over. How do we talk about sexuality? How do we talk about gender? That these are all, moving things. These are things that can change over your lifetime. They are things that, you ultimately have say over. And so you can make whatever decisions you want. You can feel however you want about it. And that is all okay. That's what I'm trying to do.
And I think with our kids is sometimes well, often, the nature of having a disability means you don't have autonomy over a lot of things, and there are more people in your dollhouse scrabbling around. So making sure whatever their disability is, that they have access to information and knowledge that makes sense for them. I just think it's another part of respecting them as a full and whole human being, that this is something they should have autonomy over, like everybody should. And just, due to the fact they sort of perceive or are in the world differently, doesn't mean they don't deserve that as well.
I just want them to be exactly that, accepted and happy, and to have that joyful life and experience that we want for every child. And I don't know how we're going to get there except by one day at a time.
One teaspoon.
One teaspoon at a time.
Literally the elephant again, which I think is the most bizarre metaphor I've ever heard in my life. But, Kiki, you said about, the world that we live in. And that's what I think, like, in my whare, I know what our beliefs are. I know what our kaupapa is. And then you look out in the big, scary world and you're like, wow, that is not a place that's going to celebrate my child's authentic life. But maybe it's the elephant, and it's all these little conversations that we're having. If we can just keep all having these conversations all over the place, then, we're going to finish eating the elephant.
Or we can, and it's maybe a better analogy is the planting the seeds, right?
Yeah.
Those seeds of conversations everywhere, so that when we do look out the window and we look at the world, it is a place where we want our children to be in, and it is a place where we want them to exist and to grow and to thrive.
Yeah. Yeah, and these conversations don't have to be awful. Like, we've had fun, right?
Yeah, that's
Talking about this stuff. I think sometimes those moments where you go, oh, this feels really hard, but also, like, we can do it. As parents who have had we've got these incredible children, but life hasn't always gone the way we expected parenting to go. And we're still here, we're still celebrating, we still got these beautiful, joyful, vibrant lives. So we can do this, like, we are doing it. And I think maybe that's the thing, when you start going, this feels too hard, how am I going to do it? It's kind of be like, I'm doing it.
Don't overthink it.
Yeah, I'm going to keep doing it.
Just keep doing it. Because we've done everything else that we didn't think we were going to have to think about ever.
Yeah. I mean, if you think the amount of times as a parent that you've gone, I can't do this.
Yeah.
You did it.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Courage Club. We hope you found something here that's going to help you have those brave chats. This is the last episode with our parents panel, so I really want to thank Lena, Kiki and Angela so much for sitting down with me and having some really brave conversations. In the upcoming final bonus episode, we're going to be sitting down with two knowledgeable advisors who work in this space, who can answer some of the questions we've heard and some of the questions that have bubbled up throughout the conversations. There's been lots of work behind the scenes for this podcast, so thank you to all our parents, whānau and young people who shared their stories with us to inform this kōrero, and a special shout out to our advisors, particularly our partners at Help Auckland and RPA for keeping us safe. If you want to find further resources after listening to this conversation, there's more info on our website, www.courageclub.co.nz. See you here next time.